Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road episode 265. Greta, what is going down in the
Hey.
underground?
Ooh, you mixed it up this week. Going down in the underground?
That's right.
Well, I live above the ground, so I guess nothing is
Okay.
happening underground.
Well, not that you know of. Don't speak on behalf of the people who do live underground.
You're right. I shouldn't. I feel like you're reminding me of a good Ben Folds song right now, though.
Like Bilbo in a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit.
Oh, see,
Mm-hmm.
you got me. Okay.
Nice.
All right. Well done.
On this episode, we are going to be discussing more details from the nature of Middle-earth right here, specifically regarding Númenor, because there's some interesting details about Númenor. These are some of the things I've been calling, playfully suggesting, are $5 million footnotes, because the book came out, just a few months ago, whereas they've been producing Latron Prime for years now. And so it's like they, some writers somewhere reading this book, and he goes to the producers and says, we're going to need $5 million more to make some changes, right, to the production.
Because we did it all wrong.
Right. Aren't I clever? All right. Before we get started, we'd like to give it. Oh, by the way, we're also make sure you stick around to the end, because we're going to be talking about, there's a lot of discussion on last week's episode, specifically on YouTube, about this question of what race are hobbits. So it's some good stuff. People dropping all kinds of interesting factoids and references for us. So we're going to discuss some of that towards the end.
Okay, very cool.
Before we get started on all of this, we'd like to give a double up air five to our patrons. Ready, Greta?
Yeah.
Patrons, you guys ready? I hope you're ready. Here it comes.
I'm ready. We're gonna do this.
3, 2, 1. Whoosh. Nice.
Well done.
Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Andrew T, John R, Ms. Anonymous, Redhawk, and Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all so much. Also want to give a shout out to Richard K, who was already a patron, but Richard boosted and annualized his pledge. So
awesome.
Boom. Deserves an air five right there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
3, 2, 1. Whoosh. Nice. That's just for Richard right there. I don't want to catch anybody else doing that right there. All right. That was for you, Richard. All right. Hey, please support the Tolkien Road, patreon.com/Tolkien Road. We highly value your support. Every additional dollar that comes in is like, boom, wind in our sails. Right. And we've talked about 2022 is going to be a big year, not like it's going to be a big year for Tolkiendom because of all the things that are going to be happening. It's going to be an explosion of knowledge. People are going to be like wanting to know about the Silmarillion and all these things they didn't know about before.
Yep.
And we are here for that. We are here to represent for the mind of Tolkien, right? That's our big goal and all of that. So
I like that.
We're going to be going back to the Silmarillion. We're going to be having a lot of fun. We're going to be needing you guys to help, right? To help bring the knowledge of the Silmarillion, to the world, because let's be honest, who knows what Amazon's going to do, right? Who knows? It could be awesome. We hope it's awesome. Or it could be a complete disaster, or it could be just somewhere in between and it needs some correction to be like, this is actually what Tolkien said.
And they're going to listen to us for sure.
Absolutely they are. Absolutely
why wouldn't they?
We are going to be so awesome that they have no choice but to listen to us, because we want to represent for the mind of Tolkien. All right. Special note for our current patrons. For those of you who are in one of the higher tiers, we're getting ready to send our annual gifts. We're quite behind for some of you, so we hope you like them, right? So this is, we've ordered the stuff. It's in process now. It's going to arrive for us, and then we've got to send it to you all, right? So some of this stuff is going to be arriving here and at our place in the next few weeks, and then we're going to be sending it out. We're working on something really special for those of you who have been with us for a long time and or have contributed a lot, right? Like kind of the highest amounts. So we've got something really special there. I can't give you a promised date on that, but it's in process, and we don't want to spoil the surprise, but it's going to be really cool. So I'm
excited.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to hear people's reactions when they see what they're getting. So all right. And don't forget, now is the time to get on board. This is for everybody now. Now is the time to get on board the Fellowship of the Road. Starting right now, through the end of the year, annual pledges get you 2 months free. 2 months free, right? So you make an annual pledge, you get 2 months free. Additionally, for those who pledge annually at the $5 per month, aka Elrond level or above, you'll immediately get your choice of a signed copy of one of my books, Tolkien's Requiem or Tolkien's Overture. And if you pledge at the $10 per month or above level, you'll get both books, right? So that's in addition to the stuff that you already get when you sign up. So I think that's a pretty sweet deal.
I agree.
Boom.
Yeah.
All right. Y'all, we have a lot of work to do in 2022. So we need your support to make it happen. We want to make it worthy of Tolkien and Middle Earth. All right. Patreon.com/Tolkien Road. That's where you find out more details. That's where you make it happen. Hey, YouTube, it's time for the weekly Tolkien Road Air 5 for all of those watching us on YouTube. 3, 2, 1. Boom.
Gotcha.
That was a good one.
That was a good one. We're just getting better and better. You
too can be a part of the weekly Tolkien Road Air 5. Just head on over to YouTube where this episode is posted and give us your best in the comments below. We are so close. We're almost to 1,000 subs, you guys. So now is the time. Go over there. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the 1,000th sub and you'll be like,
no, that would be cool.
I was the one. If you are, send us that screenshot, right? Send us that screenshot where you become the 1,000th sub. If you can, I don't know if that's actually a screenshot you can take, but that would be cool to see it and be able to say this person was the 1,000th sub.
I was, so our son, one of our sons is keeping very close tabs on our subscriber numbers. And he told me the other day how close we were. And I asked him and I was like, well, have you already subscribed? And he looked at me like so condescendingly and he was like, yeah, like 3 months ago.
Come on, Mom.
I was like, oh, well, thanks. I know. I was like, oh, excuse me for asking. Jeez. So anyway, subscribe if you haven't already.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or we'll bring the kid out to look at you like that. Be like, why haven't you subscribed yet?
Exactly.
All right. Hey, one last thing. I know it's been a lot, a lot of front material this time, you guys, but we got a lot going on that we want to tell you about. And here's one of the biggest things. Y'all ready for this? T-shirts. We got the first Tolkien Road T-shirts here.
You can't even see mine.
Yeah, there you go. Got to stand up a little bit.
I'm so short.
So if you're not watching us on YouTube, then you're not seeing that right now, right?
But they're awesome.
Yes, they are.
Look how cool they are.
Whoop. Oh, it's hard to kind of stand up at the right angle to let you see it.
Actually.
But you can go back and see that. Look, these things are awesome. Okay. I am a t-shirt snob. I do not.
It is true.
Like I have many t-shirts that I've received over the years and I don't wear them because even though I like what they represent, I'm representing for something that I like. The fit is wrong. They're not comfortable, whatever. I specifically was not going to make a t-shirt unless I could make it from one of these t-shirts. This is the Bella Canvas 3001, right? You didn't even know I
didn't know they had model
t-shirts
numbers.
had names like those, but this does, right? I have a lot of these types of t-shirts with different, representing different things. It is super comfy.
Really comfy.
It fits just like I want a t-shirt to fit. And I just feel so style in it. I feel like I just feel so good in it instead of feeling kind of all constricted and everything. So my point is you're going to get this t-shirt and you're going to love to wear it and you're going to be representing for the Tolkien Road. Right. So, I mean,
lots of cool colors too.
It's a big win-win. Yeah. So I've got the heather gray, I think is what it's called. And you've got the heather blue, I think.
Yeah. It's kind of like an aqua-y bluish green. It's really cool.
For sure. So you need to go to truemythspress.com, which is this new little web store I've set up. It's got my books on there too, but you go over there and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. You go over there and you use the code ROAD and you can get 10% off your t-shirt purchase, right? You get 10% off if you buy 10 t-shirts. So if you want to buy a t-shirt for you and your 9 best friends, we highly encourage that.
Christmas is coming.
Yeah. We highly encourage, actually your 8 best friends, we highly encourage buying things in the sum of 9 because that's the number of the fellowship, right?
There you go.
So you're going to save 10% no matter what if you use that code. Even if you forget to use that code right now, and when I got this going on, I'm going to make sure I discount you that, right? So that you do get the discount. So we're really excited about these things. Several people have already bought theirs, and these things are they're great. You're going to love this t-shirt. What else do I need to say about that? truemythspress.com. Look in the show notes wherever you're watching, and you'll find a link there. Use the code ROAD. And hey, by the way, don't wait too long, because I'm not going to keep that code up there forever. I'm kind of like, the Roman emperor and gladiator, right? Who's like, he's like, what am I going to do? Thumbs up or thumbs down? I might just decide to go thumbs down on that code at some point.
Or you're like the gong guy, the guy that rings the gong.
Yeah.
And sends the person through the floor.
Or, by the way, you can become a patron and you get a 20% code.
Oh.
That's good forever, right? Patrons, boom. Again, love you guys. All right, y'all. These t-shirts, they rock. Go get yourself one.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna get a second one, actually.
Nice.
Because I didn't get to pick my color.
Yeah.
He picked it for me, which I like it, but I think I need a second one, because I have things that won't go with this that would go with another color.
Mm-hmm.
We women, we always gotta be fashionable.
Yes.
And these are super fashionable, by the way, and really comfortable.
They are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just like being salesy about the comfort either. Like, legitimately, I own several different of these types of t-shirts, and it's hard to go back to another type of t-shirt after you wear one of these, because it's really comfortable.
Yeah, it's really comfortable. All right. I think we've said enough.
I think we have.
Go get your t-shirts.
That was a rather long intro.
Yeah.
Thanks for bearing with us, everybody. Okay. All right. I just thought of a really dumb pun, but I'm not going to do it. I'm
so proud of you.
Self-control
at its finest.
I wonder if anybody can guess what it is, though, in the comments below. We'll see. All right. $5 million footnotes. Here we go. So, Númenor and the nature of Middle Earth. All right. First of all, this is something we talked about on the last episode, but I want to make this very clear from the outset. I'm becoming more and more passionate about this point. All right. The Númenorian chieftains did not have beards. They were beardless, and not just because they shaved them, but because they had no face, because they were because they had the Eldar blood in them, right? And that was the dominant strain. So that's one thing that I wonder if they had some Númenorians with beards, and they're like, uh-oh, got to go back and change those scenes.
Yeah, I was gonna say they could probably just Photoshop that, couldn't they? Couldn't you just is there software out there that they could just remove beards?
You got to do it well, or it looks really cheesy. So that's the thing.
Okay. Well, yeah. I guess we'll see.
So yeah, so that's a very important point that can be found in it's on page 188 in this copy right here, under the chapter named Beards. Right. So and that means, as we mentioned last week, people like Aragorn, Boromir, Faramir, Denethor, they did not have beards either, right? Because they were pretty closely descended from this, from the line of Elros, right? So, the Númenorian chieftain sort of group, right? Other Númenorians did have beards, right? So if you want to use the term lesser Númenorians, because we can think of them as being lesser in the sense of having lesser lifespans, and we'll get to that here in just a second. But kind of your average Númenorian probably would have had a beard,
because they didn't have the elven blood in them.
Right. Yes. Okay. That's correct.
Gotcha.
So, but those who were descended from Elros directly, that was a very dominant, I guess you could say, dominant trait, right? Genetic trait was the Eldar did not have beards, did not have facial hair, and so that would have been prominent within the DNA of those who were closely descended from the line of Elros. Yeah.
Cool.
Boom. All right. Next up is a little more involved. All right. So we started off with just a little something easy, kind of easier, more easily palatable. There's a really interesting chapter on the lives of Númenorians in here. All right. So this is a pretty long one. I had to adjust my chair from all that standing up with the t-shirts. All right. So, lives of Númenorians.
You look really big now compared to me.
I know we're trying to gotta get our positioning back right again. I don't have my chair all pulled up. Let me just take a second, you guys, and fix my chair so that I'm not I
think my chair's okay.
Yeah.
I didn't really move my chair.
I did.
Well, I probably got a better view of your shirt than mine. That's better.
We do this live. Yes.
You never know what you're going to get, people.
Never know what you're going to get. Mm-mm. All right. Lives of Númenorians.
Speaking of live. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. This is a different kind of life. Anyway.
So here's some of the things from this chapter. First of all, the Edain, right? After they help with, in the War of Wrath, and that's kind of how they wind up going to Númenor in the first place. They ask for two things from the Valar. they ask for long life and peace. And it says here, peace was readily granted. Long life, not so readily, and only after Manwë had consulted Eru. So peace is, an easy request. The Valar can kind of do that on their own. Long life, not so much. Manwë had to specifically consult Eru about that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
As the creator.
Yeah. Peace, you can kind of think of it as like Manwë and the Valar had, kind of were in charge of the things of Arda, right? And so it's creatures within Arda, the men of Middle Earth, men, and kind of like their circumstances around them, their context, they could control how peaceful their context was. So it's like, all right, yeah, we'll set up this island in the middle of the sea and it's going to be really beautiful, and won't have a lot of like, and we'll get into like well, actually at another episode, we'll discuss like what kinds of beasts were in Númenor, because there's another chapter devoted to that. But this is an island. It's going to be a pretty peaceful place. It's not going to have a lot of hardships, relatively speaking, for you. So we can do that. As far as the lifespan, you think of like whose children were they, right? Were men the children of the Valar? No, they were the children of Iluvatar, right? So in that sense, as far as like their nature, the nature of men themselves, not the things around them, but the nature of men themselves, Iluvatar, it's like Manwë had to go directly to Iluvatar to see if he could work with that, right? If he could grant them longer life as men.
So, yeah, that makes sense.
It's an interesting point. And there's another chapter right after this, a very short one, that also makes comment on this. And it says, Manwë warned, so the long life of Númenorians was an answer to the actual prayers of the Edain and Elros. Manwë warned them of its perils. They asked to have more or less the lifespan of old because they wanted to learn more. That's something interesting that I just picked up on right there, is they wanted to have the lifespan of old, meaning that maybe the first men had a longer lifespan, right?
So like the lifespan that their predecessors would have had.
Like ancient predecessors, right? So and that's an interesting note. That's kind of that immediately strikes me as almost being like an idea that like Tolkien takes from the Old Testament, right? Because you go back to like Genesis and people are living like 900 years, and then the lifespan slowly like kind of gets shorter and shorter until they're like what we have now, right? So so that's a very interesting little note that Tolkien put in there. But so Manwë warns them of the perils of that.
Does it say specifically what those perils are?
No, it just says he warned them of those perils.
But he still granted it, right?
He still granted it, but he warned. It's like, okay, right? It's like what we what you do with kids, right? You're like, all right, you get to a certain age, and you're like, you sure you want this? This is the pros. This is the cons. It doesn't seem like such a good idea to me, but this is your choice. What do you want, right? And then they can make the choice. So,
yeah. Sometimes that's what it takes, right? I mean, you can tell, people or your kids till you're blue in the face, this is not a good idea. But sometimes they just have to experience for themselves, So it's just like, that's what Iluvatar did here with the Edain, right?
That's right.
It's like, well, I'll go ahead and grant it, and you see if it was a good idea or not.
I warned you.
Yeah.
Don't say I didn't warn you. All right.
That's fair. Yeah.
It's like Manwë, all the finger wagging.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah.
Anyway, all right.
I guess
the next interesting note I found here. You can come back and make further comment on that if you want. I'm just trying to keep it moving
figure
forward.
Out what I wanted to say.
Yeah. All right. Fine. That's fine. If you don't have something good to say.
What is all this finger wagging?
I just can't help myself once you get the finger.
I was actually trying to picture Manwë wagging his finger, and it wasn't working. Like Manwë just doesn't strike me as a finger wagger.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Like he seems like I don't know. He seems like he'd be more Mr. T. Mr. T never like wagged his finger. Did he?
I wouldn't have thought of
pity the fool.
I
feel
wouldn't
like
have thought of
that's
him
more
as
a
Mr.
Mon
T.
way.
I feel like he's somewhere like if there's a spectrum of like finger wagging versus Mr. T on the other end of the spectrum, I feel like Monway's like diametrically opposed to both. He's like somewhere right in the middle between the two.
I don't know.
But probably a little closer to Mr. T because Mr. T's cooler.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. T's a man.
Monway had to be careful with the finger pointing though, because he could, I mean, he was like the most powerful figure. So if he wags his finger, it's like, whoops.
Who knows what could have happened?
Caused a hurricane with that one. My bad.
Yep.
Did I do that?
Yeah, or like lightning bolts or thunderclaps. Just
what has happened to this episode?
I don't know. Please get back on track.
Got all excited about these t-shirts and then just went off the rails. All right.
All right. Moving on.
Back to it.
Okay.
Weariness. All right. That's the next thing. Really interesting passage right here. So make sure I got the right one. Yes. Oh, wait.
Yeah, right there. You got it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
By this is meant that the weariness was not felt by the long eval until about the 400th year. So those who long lived. How long they might have lived on into decrepitude if they had clung to life is not known, because in the early generations they did not do so. Clinging to life, and so in the end dying perforce and involuntarily, was one of the changes brought about by the shadow and the rebellion of the Númenóreans. It was also accompanied by a shrinking of their natural lifespan. These things first appeared in the 14th generation, that is, after the death of Tar Atanamir in Second Age 2251. So this whole idea, like as we've discussed before, normally Númenóreans would reach the end of their, like close to the end of their lifespan, and they would kind of voluntarily give up the ghost, if you will, right? So they would, they would kind of reach the point of weariness with life, and they would just be willing to let it go, right? But at some point they started clinging to life, and that was the desire to do so was something that was brought about by the reemergence of the shadow.
Right. Yeah. We've talked about that on previous episodes as well, I believe.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. So the increase, so as far as the aging process, here's what it says. The increase of the Númenórean lifespan was brought about by assimilating their life mode to that of the Eldar up to a limited point. They were, however, expressly warned that they had not become Eldar, but remained mortal men, and had been granted only an extension of the period of their vigor of mind and body. Thus, as the Eldar, they grew at much the same rate as ordinary men. Gestation, infancy, childhood, and adolescence up to puberty and full growth proceeded more or less as before. But when they had achieved full growth, they then aged or wore out very much slower, so that for them, 5 years had about the same effect as 1 year for ordinary mortals. All right, so to break that down, basically they aged like early on from infancy until adulthood, they aged at roughly the same rate.
As the Eldar.
As the Eldar and other men, right? So they kind of grew up at the same rate, right?
Okay.
But then they hit that point, and they hit the point of like early adulthood, and then 1 year for a normal person, a normal man, becomes like it's 5 years for them, right? It's 5 years for the Númenóreans. So that's illustrated. Is
that number actually in there?
Yeah.
Like the 1 to 5 ratio?
Yeah, that's what it says, right?
Oh.
So that for them, 5 years had about the same effect as 1 year for ordinary mortals.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
So there's a little table given on the next page right here that helps to illustrate this, right? So for those of you who have the book in front of you, the top line of numbers is how a Númenórean would age, and then the bottom line is like the corresponding age of an ordinary mortal.
This is on page 318. If you have
page 318 in the hardcover version of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if there's any other versions of the book, but just in case anybody's watching this in 10 years when there's a paperback version, it's page 318 in the original hardcover.
It's good to be specific.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So right here we have 25 for a Númenórean would be like 21 for a normal human. You kind of think of that as like the, prime, like early adulthood, right? But what's really interesting, so those numbers roughly correspond, right? 25 for a Númenórean is 21 for a normal man, right? But then you jump to 50 for a Númenórean, and that's like 26 for a normal man. So it's 5 year difference for a normal man, but it's a 25-year difference for a Númenorian. Another 25 years, 75 for a Númenorian would be 31 for a normal man.
So when a Númenorian is 71, they basically feel like they were 31.
Yeah. Yeah, or like 30, right?
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, right. That's a pretty awesome deal.
Yeah.
So, you kind of go up this chart and so for example, I'm revealing my age, people.
I'm not revealing my age.
I would not expect you to.
And also we are not close in age. So keep that in mind once he reveals his age.
Yes.
Okay.
I will say nothing more about Greta's age. Hold on. Am I 42?
Yep.
Yeah. Yes. So 42, 42 would be 125 in Númenorian years. Yeah. Or really like 130 in Númenorian years.
I'm getting really jealous of the Númenorians right now.
For reals, right? So that's, just an illustration. If you kind of think of, so like retirement age, right? And the, like the official retirement age in like the US is around 60. That would be 225 years old for a Númenorian. A little less than 225. Wow. 220. You think of like the normal, like the average, I feel like the average age of death, and maybe in the US is like in the late 70s, right? At this point, I feel like, or we'll just say mid 70s, that would be roughly 300. Okay. And people, if it was a particularly long-lived person, we think of somebody who lives to 100. That's pretty amazing. Like you don't meet many people who live to 100 these days. But it happens more and more, but it's still a pretty amazing thing when somebody lives to be that age. That would be 425 Númenorian years. Wow. So yeah, that's pretty interesting little table here to illustrate, to illustrate the various lifespans.
So that was quite a gift.
Yeah.
From Onway.
For sure. One thing that Tolkien emphasizes is that even though there's kind of that's like the physiological equivalent, right? Equivalencies, but he makes a point that the Númenorian, another gift that they had as part of this long life, was that they actually achieved like mental maturity much more quickly than normal men. So if you kind of assume like 20 is a good age to kind of hang your hat on, like you're starting to achieve like mental maturity, right? And surely some people it all depends on how you define mental maturity, right? But I've heard plenty of people say, and no slight to our younger listeners, because we were both young listeners and young people at one point, teenagers at one point, but there's a lot of talk about like, hey, you're not really like mentally mature until you're actually somewhere in your 20s, right? And some people even put that like late in your 20s. It all varies depending on various people, but anyway, mentally, they mentally aged much quicker than normal men. And I believe, I actually don't know that I have this well marked here, but I believe it was like at 7. Oh yeah, here it is. After about 7 years, they grew up mentally with rapidity. And at 20 years, knew and understood far more than a normal human of that age, right? So yeah, so their mental capacity was greater and developed quicker than that of ordinary men. So, I kind of think of like, our kids when they were 7 years old, and, they're still developing like mentally, but it says that they like a Númenorian would hit 7 and then just like kind of like great leap forward, just really develop quickly mentally until they were 20, and then they would be like really sharp, so it's
a good deal.
Yeah.
Really good.
Let's see a little more from that other chapter. So there's the Lives of Númenorians, which is a longer chapter, and then the chapter following just after is the Aging of Númenorians, which gives a lot more of a table format. This makes a distinction. So this Aging of Númenorians chapter makes a distinction between regular Númenorians and the line of Elros. Okay. So again, the line of Elros had the elvish blood
and no beards
and no beards. That's right. And then the Númenorians, the average Númenorians had beards, and they didn't quite live. They didn't maybe have the same extended lifespans that the line of Elros would have, but they still had extended lifespans. So line of Elros, they would hit their full growth is somewhere between 25 and 30. And then they are in youth and vigor of life from 30 until 300, and then the coming of weariness is somewhere between 350 and 400, right? So whereas your average Númenorian would reach full growth at around 20-25, youth and vigor from 25 to 175. So, and then coming of weariness in the early 200s, right? So still a much longer lifespan. Still, I would, that's somewhere like 4 to 5 times the, let's see, is that a right number? So if they're living to 200, if the coming of weariness for a normal human is somewhere around, we'll just say 70. So coming of weariness around 200 right here. Yeah. So that's like 3 times the normal lifespan for a Númenorian of a regular human. And then the line of Elros is even longer. Right. So anyway, interesting tables over here on in the Aging of Númenorians chapter, which is a pretty short one. All right. Next thing that I thought was really interesting is there's a lot of discussion of the nature of Númenorean marriage in here. So, and a lot of this comes from a footnote on page 318. I'm going to say this too. I talked about the footnotes in here a lot on the last episode, and I said I was pretty sure that the footnotes were Tolkien's, and like the emphasis and these kinds of things. Actually, I was talking about the emphasis whenever there's something in italics. And Carl Hostetter actually commented on the last episode and said the italics are always Tolkien's italics unless or Tolkien's emphasis, unless I specifically say that I was adding that emphasis. And then he goes on to say, I only did that once in the entire book. So if it's in italics, it's probably Tolkien doing that, right? Or adding the emphasis at least. So yes, this footnote on the Númenorians, and then again, this is the way I understand it is these footnotes where they have the stars and the different symbols at the bottom are actually Tolkien's footnotes. And then you've got notes at the end of the chapter, which I understand are Carl's like sort of almost like bibliographical notes. He often refers to like other works from Tolkien to say like, here's kind of something that corresponds with this over here. So Carl, appreciate all of the, the feedback and making sure that we're on the right track with a lot of this. So this footnote on page 318, the Númenorians, it says the Númenorians were monogamous, as is later said. No one of whatever rank could divorce a husband or wife, nor take another spouse in the lifetime of their first. Marriage was not entered into by all. There was, it appears from occasional statements in the few surviving tales or annals, a slightly less number of women than men, at any rate in the earlier centuries. But apart from this numerical limitation, there was always a small minority that refused marriage, either because they were engrossed in lore or other pursuits, or because they had failed to obtain the spouse whom they desired and would seek for no other. So, interesting little notes there on the nature of it. First of all, we find out that it's monogamous. Once you were married, it was for life. It was, divorce was not really even allowed, it sounds like. So yeah, pretty strong stuff. And there's a lot more in here. So it goes on to say, thus the Númenorians, who seldom had more than 4 children in each marriage, would frequently produce those within a period of about 50 to 75 years. So even though they were living for potentially 300, 400 years, they would produce children, really kind of still pretty early on in life, and only for about 50 to 75 years. And like, if you had 4 kids, that was like amazing. Right. It also talks about like the spacing of the children would often be like anywhere from 5 to 20 years. Right. And that can sound like a lot, but then we have to remember that like 1 year for a normal man would be like 5 years for a Númenorian in their adulthood. Right.
So basically 2 Númenorian kids spaced 5 years apart would actually be very close in age.
That's right. Yeah. And once they're fully grown.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it talks a lot about like the raising of kids too. And so I guess like bearing the children, right? So we think of like, I think early in the book, and we haven't really talked about this in the podcast, but it talks about elvish women and like the bearing of children. And it took a lot like to basically for elvish women, because, for various reasons that are interesting of, in and of themselves, but it's kind of similar with the Númenóreans, right? Because it's almost like because of the longer lifespan of their children that they gave more of themselves to the bearing of these children, right? So there's a sense in which they needed that recovery time. They needed more recovery time, right?
That makes sense.
Before they were going to have, more kids. So
that's very interesting.
Yeah. So let's see. There's a interesting note about the pre-shadow society. We get a little glimpse of kind of everyday Númenórean culture here. Let's see, make sure I got the right reference. So yes, page 319. If the Númenóreans were not lustful, they did not think the love of men and women less important or of less delight than did other men. On the contrary, they were steadfast lovers, and any breaches in the bonds and affection between parents or between them and the children were thought great evils and sorrows. So with the delights of eating and drinking. Until the shadow came, there were in Númenor few gluttons or drunkards. No one ate or drank to excess, or indeed much at any time. They esteemed good food, which was plentiful, and expended care and art in its cooking and serving. But the distinction between a feast and an ordinary meal consisted rather in this: in the adornments of the table, in the music, and in the merriment of many eating together, than in the food. Though naturally at such feasts, food and wines of more rare and choice sorts would sometimes appear. Yeah. So I like that note. Again, you get this sense of it's almost like human society in a way that's sort of that it could be, especially early on in Númenor's history, right? It's human society in a way that's like sort of idyllic, right? If people were actually like virtuous, if they were peaceful, if they, you could argue if they had longer lives, or if they didn't cling to so many things, or they didn't try to dominate one another, like here's the kind of society that maybe you could achieve, right? This peaceful society. No one's drinking, no one's eating or drinking to excess. No one's, it's and it's not about those things, right? It's about the fellowship, right? It's the feast is about the fellowship. The food is all great and they enjoy it and they take care in preparing it, but it's not about the food. It's about like, just the friendship, the fellowship, and all of these sorts of things
too, right? Like adorning the table and it's more about the it's about the company and about the place, kind of the setup, not so much about, it's about the stuff that will last, not the stuff that you will consume.
That's right. Well said. Thanks. I like that.
Okay.
And so there's a whole lot of other good stuff in this chapter that, really solid description of what everyday Númenórean society might have been like. A lot of description of like, what were the peaceful pursuits of the men? What were the peaceful pursuits of the women? We're not going to dive into a lot of that right now. But we'll probably come back to it at some point in the future. There's more to this chapter. And then there's a whole nother chapter on just what the land of Númenor was like, that we'll save for another time as well. The one note I will end on is from this chapter is on what Tolkien here calls kind of the greatest problem of the Númenóreans. So he says, pride was no doubt their chief weakness, increased later by contact with men of lesser kinds. Though not at first. Their first sentiments and motives were of pity and benevolence. They were also proud of their ancestry in general and in particular as a people and as individuals. And all men of all ranks kept scrolls of their descent. Descent from Eärendil or from Baron and Luthien were their chief titles to nobility. Yeah. So, but anyway, pride being their greatest downfall. They are gifted to be superior, and really that superiority, those gifts are meant to be so that they can put them to good use, right? So that, maybe so they could go to these other lands and talk to other men and be like, look, this is what's possible, right? If we can establish a society that's peaceful, that works for the mutual benefit of all, right? And again, it gets to that concept of like when they first went back to Middle Earth, that they were intended to be like more like a missionary people, right? To bring good news, to bring light, to bring the light of knowledge and of truth and all these things to the peoples of Middle Earth, to bring them out from under the shadow. And that's what they did at first, but then the shadow got hold of them, and they started to want to dominate. They let their pride get the best of them, and then the downfall. So,
but not to really justify it, but I feel like it would be hard not to be proud as a Númenorian when you think about how good you have it, right? I mean,
yeah,
when you think about the gifts that you got specifically from Onway, and then living on this beautiful island, and it would take a lot of self-control to not be proud. I feel like
I think there's a lot of truth to that idea, right? When there's always a temptation when you have a gift, right, in some area to want to. Do you use that gift? Are you humble enough to use that gift in the right way, or do you allow that gift to become something that you can like
lord over other people
that you can
advantage,
that you can just kind of become full of, and use it for the wrong purposes. So,
all right.
Yeah,
that's why I feel like it just reminds me of that expression that we learned from our pastor when we were out in the Pacific Northwest. He would always say, "Blessed to be a blessing."
Yeah.
I mean, and I feel like the Númenorians were that way for a while, right? Like they did use their blessings to bless others. But clearly it didn't last, unfortunately.
Yeah, it didn't. And that was their downfall.
Yep.
Eventually.
Oh, wow.
All right. Well, what do you say we get to some correspondence, Greta?
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
All right. First of all, I did mention that we had a lot of correspondence from episode 264. So I'm going to go over to that and hit some of it. So I want to make sure I do the exact quote from Carl. So he said, "All italics are Tolkien's own unless I specify emphasis added," which I did only once in The Nature of Middle-earth. So there you go. All right. Next up is, so we had several notes on this question of whether hobbits are men. So I call this, "Yes, John, hobbits are men, duh." Right. So here we go. Actually, people were a lot nicer than that in their
of course,
in their references, because we have awesome fans.
Yep.
This is from Donar Apaldra. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Great episode. Unfortunately, I don't remember the sources, but Tolkien definitely did state multiple times in earlier published materials that hobbits are in fact considered to belong to the race of men. Tolkien even went so far as to make clear that the ultimate fate of a hobbit's fea is the same as that of a big man. Quote in quotations, big
man. Yeah.
In response to that, Sophie Jones said in a letter, I believe, "This is the first time we've seen it properly, though. One has to take everything in the letters with a grain of salt, because Tolkien usually forgot what he told people when it came time to actually write." I think that's part of what's going on here. And to me, a lot of these references don't always feel like they're like spot on clear in saying this. I guess it was just said so clearly here that that's kind of what made it news for me. But continuing with Sophie's note, "However, I would point out that it is the only explanation that fits all the evidence. They live in what was once the kingdom of Arnor and age exactly like the non-royal Dunedain. Frodo is said to be of age when he is 30, and the hobbits are only mildly surprised when Bilbo turns 111, an age that no real life human has yet reached. Also, it's the only explanation for why their name would come from Rohirric, a detail mentioned in the appendices of Lord of the Rings. As for their size, the reasoning is simple. In genetically isolated populations, normally recessive traits like dwarfism can become dominant as a consequence of inbreeding. This is usually called island dwarfism, but it doesn't only happen on literal islands. It can happen anytime a population is permanently cut off but contains enough genetic diversity to sustain itself, especially if small size is selected for either by sexual preference or some environmental pressure. In this case, the trait would be strongly selected for during the wars with Angmar. Holding up underground near rivers and being sneaky would be good defensive strategies against the Witch King. Lending support to this, the Ringwraiths seem to have an excessively difficult time finding the hobbits in the Lord of the Rings." That's an awesome comment there, Sophie.
Really good.
Really love that.
Really, really good. It's a lot of great points there.
Fantastic. Fantastic comment. I'm just knocking it out of the park there. All right.
It was a mic drop.
That was for sure. Well, but then we have James F, James Falinger. And James leaves a lot of comments, very knowledgeable individual when it comes to matters Tolkien. And so so James usually he writes and kind of quotes us from a specific snippet of the episode, then he'll respond. So he quotes us. He says, saying hobbits are humans. I don't think that's ever been spelled out anywhere. And he says, well, via the Tolkien FAQ by William D.B. Luce, available on the web, it is plain indeed, and this is a quote from the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring. It is plain indeed that in spite of later estrangement, hobbits are relatives of ours, far nearer to us than elves or even than dwarves. Of old, they spoke the languages of men after their own fashion and liked and disliked much the same things as men did. But what exactly our relationship is can no longer be discovered. The beginning of hobbits lies far back in the elder days that are now lost and forgotten. So right there, it seems like he's saying like they're much closer to men than they are to dwarves or elves, but he's not exactly saying directly they are men, are they?
No.
Is he?
I don't think so.
Okay. He said it does say of old they spoke the languages of men. But and that was the sense that I always got from reading these things and Lord of the Rings is it's like their origin was just mysterious.
I mean, it does say that they're relatives of ours, right? So I mean, I guess you could pull from that well, that's a relative has to be of the same race. So
yeah.
But I mean, it's not like it spelled out. But.
Yeah, it's and sometimes it's easy to kind of miss these details with Tolkien because he'll say it in a way that's not as direct as you might expect it to be. So anyway, I see that now. This is from the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, letter 158. The hobbits are, of course, really meant to be a branch of the specifically human race, not elves or dwarves. Hence, the two kinds can dwell together, as at Bree, and are called just the big folk and little folk. They are entirely without non-human powers, but are represented as being more in touch with nature, the soil and other living things, plants and animals, and abnormally, for humans, free from ambition or greed of wealth. So that's another little interesting note there. So that's from one of Tolkien's letters, letter 158.
Entirely without non-human powers. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, he's just saying they don't have like any special powers, right? They don't have like any like magical powers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like they're just base model. Okay.
Yeah. What'd you say? Base model?
Base model, like a car that doesn't have like automatic doors or something. Like your base model of automobile.
Well, neither do the big people. Neither do the big folk. Right.
Oh yeah. Nope, that's true too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
They're like I don't know what's.
They don't have any special gifts like the elves.
If the big folk are the Cadillacs, then they are the
convertibles.
The convertibles. Well, that's a better way of putting it. I was going to say like the Ford Pinto or something.
The little Miatas.
Yeah, right. That works.
Okay, the little sports cars. Okay,
they're more fun. Yeah, I like that. I like the little convertible sports car because they're more fun.
Yeah.
So.
And they're smaller.
Yeah. All right. Then we have this quote from the Firstborn. This is a Tolkien compass. I'm not sure. I've never heard of this work before. But anyway, I'm gonna read it. This is again from James's comment. The Firstborn title of the elves translate Firstborn, since the elves appeared in the world before all other speaking peoples, not only men but also dwarves of independent origin. Hobbits are of course meant to be a special variety of the human race. So there you go.
That's pretty well spelled out there.
Yeah. So another great. Thanks for the references, James. Always want to be set straight by the stuff that Tolkien actually said.
Absolutely.
That's one of our goals here on the show. One more comment on this subject is from Alfred V. Alfred Vincent. So people put their real names on YouTube, so I feel it's public, so I feel free to use their real names here. Alfred Vincent says Tolkien only described hobbit ears as slightly pointy. There is no definite conclusion or published canon text that describes elves' ears as pointy. Some letters hint that elves' ears are pointy, but as the professor does quite often, much is left to the imagination, i.e. Tom Bombadil, the Wife's disappearance, history of the hobbits, etc. Yeah, and I just said to that in response, I said, so many details from the Jackson films we just assume are canon, hard to get past them, right? So we just assume that elves have pointy ears. But if Alfred's correct here, then there's no actual reference in Tolkien's works to their having pointy ears.
Did we talk about pointy ears?
No, but I think he's just saying, because I mentioned that the hobbits have slightly pointy ears like elves in the last episode.
In the movie.
Well, I think I was just making the point of like, I can't remember the exact context in which I said it, but I made a reference to like, do they actually have pointy ears? Because they have pointy ears in the movie. Right.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. I remember now. Okay.
Another interesting trait, and so another thing that I believe is canon, I would be shocked to find out that I was wrong about this, is the hobbits having the large feet, right? Like the kind of large feet for their body size, and also like the tough feet. Maybe they aren't large. Maybe that's just something that's made up, but
they're wide.
But they have like kind of these special feet. And so that always struck me as like a unique, something that's like, different from men. Cause I'm like, I don't want to go walking around barefoot anywhere. It's outside,
I wish I could. I love being barefoot.
Well, I like being barefoot on like a nice day, I guess, or like at the beach or something like that, but like not on like a trail. That's weird to me. But I know people like running on trails in bare feet. So,
or shoes that mimic not having shoes on.
That's true.
Yeah.
All right. So great comments there on the whole question of hobbits being men. So I appreciate the feedback, making sure we get those references. Sophie, really loved your comment. Very insightful, putting several things together there. All right. Next quote, next piece of next comment from the last episode that I want to reference. This has nothing to do with hobbits. This is from Tom McArdle. He says, enjoying this one as usual. As far as Maiar appearing as beautiful when taking human form, that fact that they did not always do so goes along with the Son of God's appearance as a human. And he quotes from the book of Isaiah. He sprouted up like a twig before God, like a root out of parched soil. He had no stately form or majesty that might catch our attention, no special appearance that we should want to follow him. Tom goes on to say, maybe Tolkien had that in mind when describing Gandalf. As one sent to influence others without exercising power or dominion over them, maybe Gandalf chose a humble appearance to guard against any inappropriate influence. At one point in the book, Aragorn, when meeting the hobbits in Bree, expressed a related sentiment when telling the hobbits that sometimes he longed to be accepted in spite of his tough appearance. But I must admit, he said with a queer laugh, that I hoped you would take to me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. But there, I believe my looks are against me. And then Tom goes on to say, I love music, but I hadn't noticed the absence of the intro music. As one who is too busy and has too many interests with waning energy in life myself, I would say don't overwork yourself. The podcast remains excellent without the intro music. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Awesome comment, and appreciate the positive feedback on the lack of intro music. Hopefully we'll get our act together for 2022. So yeah, with new intro music. So
maybe
Greta says. All right. And then final comment I wanted to mention from this one. Well, I will say this. GGQ said there is silliness afoot at times. This is true. This is true on this podcast.
Reference to?
I think just to this podcast and to us.
Oh.
So
it's fair.
Yeah,
it's fair.
It's true. It is the truth.
And I wouldn't have any other way.
No, I wouldn't either. That's how we roll.
That's right.
Then Michael also comments on this episode and says about Tom Bombadil, is he not an embodiment of the harmony of the Ainur, representing time and nature in the same way that Ungoliant is an embodiment of Melkor's discord? All the clues point to him being more powerful, or at least of a different sort of being entirely than the Maiar, as the ring had no effect on him, and he was having no effect on him, and he was on Arda before Melkor arrived. And we know he is not one of the Valar or Eru himself. The fact that his persona is built around song is also an indicator that he was sang into existence by the music. It gives another element of balance to Tolkien's universe, and from Gollum's riddle, we know that time is the master of all, just as Tom is the master, and nature is the rule of all things. And nature is the rule all things submit to. I understand that Tom's origins have always been a source of debate, but to me, it could not be more clear, and I've always wondered why it's considered as such an unsolvable mystery. Also, thanks for making this video. The confirmation of hobbits being men and eagles being Maiar are huge revelations, and I'm looking forward to reading the book myself. Could that imply that Beorn may be descended from one of the Maiar who took on the form of a bear? Yeah, interesting questions. I think there's more to be said about the origin of Beorn. I feel like that's actually answered somewhere, but it doesn't come to me off the top of my head. As far as the question of Tom Bombadil, I mean, it is like an interesting sort of puzzle. I will reply to your comment and link to an episode we did, an interview we did with Keith Matheson about a year ago on that question. He wrote an interesting article on the question of who is Tom Bombadil. It's one of those fun ones that Tolkien left a little bit open-ended and people like to debate, right? He's kind of a riddle of a figure. I think it's fine to say that he's kind of this embodiment, right, of the harmony of the Ainur, maybe in a in a certain form, right? But in no way is it clear exactly who he is. It does, like, it feels like he could be other things. So I don't know. It's just, I don't think we'll ever know the definitive answer that was on Tolkien's mind, because I don't know that Tolkien ever intended him to have a definitive answer. It's almost like, sometimes in the in the wisdom books of the Old Testament, it will talk about, it will personify like divine wisdom, and and like the book of Proverbs and book of wisdom, and yeah, I think in a lot of cases it is, maybe in all the cases, but at least in some of the cases it is. And to me, that's in a way almost like what Tom Bombadil is supposed to represent, is like this embodiment of like natural, of being like in harmony with nature, right, with like the nature of the world. So I don't know, do with that what you will.
Personified virtue.
Yeah.
Specific. Yeah.
In a certain sense, he's not. Some people have suggested he's a Luvatar, but I think it's clear he's not a Luvatar. He's not all powerful. He would ultimately, as they say in Lord of the Rings, he would ultimately fall to Sauron if Sauron got the ring, right? He couldn't resist Sauron forever. So he's not he's not an unlimited being in any sense. And that's not what Michael is suggesting here, I don't think. But anyway, I mean, it's one of these where it's almost like he's just too poetic a figure to get like a factual, like, this is who he is. And I think that's almost what Tolkien wanted him to be, right? Is this mysterious figure that can't quite be nailed down exactly who he is.
Yeah, I think that's true.
He wanted us to like think about him a lot.
And it's fun to talk about too, Yeah, that make sure that you link to that episode we did with Keith, because I remember that was a blast.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it was.
And I'll link to Keith's article on that as well. There's been a lot of interesting stuff written about Tom Bombadil.
Is there anything about Tom in the Nature of Middle-earth?
I don't believe so. Let me do a quick check of the index here.
I feel like I asked Carl that question at some point, but I can't remember what he said.
Survey says
oh no.
Yeah, I don't see anything under Tom.
Is there anything under Bombadil?
Let me see here. Survey says yeah, nothing under Bombadil. Goes from Bodleian Library to Boromir. So
all right.
Well, y'all, thanks for all of the amazing correspondence on episode 264. Appreciates it.
For sure. Thank you.
All right. Well, where are we on this one? All right, let's do a couple more quick ones. So I'm not going to read this whole note, but we had a really awesome note from a Catholic seminarian who was writing a paper on the theme of arts and contemplation in Tolkien's works. This individual said they already flagged Mythopoeia and On Fairy Stories, and they were looking for further advice on what to read. So I'm going to read my response to them.
So they're writing a paper on what?
On the arts and contemplation and they're doing they're focusing on it with by looking at Tolkien's work.
Okay.
Right.
Got it.
So I said, I'm glad you flagged Mythopoeia, as that is a key text in this regard for sure. Mythopoeia is huge when it comes to the idea of like Tolkien's view of the arts and contemplation. There are definitely some great On Fairy Stories passages that provide insight on these topics. I'd make sure and read the whole thing of On Fairy Stories, but I'd say the end of it, beginning with the section Fantasy on through the epilogue, is key. In fact, Tolkien's term for seeing the world as it really is recovery, though he says seeing the world as is meant to be seen. Anyway, the whole last third of On Fairy Stories is key, right? If you want to really understand how Tolkien viewed the arts and the creative impulse, you gotta read on fairy stories. And I said also, Leaf by Niggle is a fictional exploration of the spiritual role of art. It's one of my favorite things he wrote. Definitely worth spending time contemplating it for insights on this topic. And then I said I'd highly recommend spending time with Anu Lindale from the Silmarillion. It also explores the operation of evil in this regard, specifically via Melkor's efforts to corrupt the music of his fellow Ainur. It shows how these topics are at the very root of what Middle-earth is all about. And I said, I think Tolkien wove these themes throughout the legends of Middle-earth. And then I said, don't forget to look at Feanor's creation of the Silmarils and his attitude towards them. There's some really deep spiritual lessons there. So, and then I said, I'm going to send you a copy of Tolkien's Overture, because that's where I like kind of wrestle with the whole question of Anu Lindale, and, you know, that being the creation story of Middle-earth, all that means, right? All that means for, you know, how Tolkien viewed creativity, how he viewed the arts, and it's really a contemplative journey through that story, you know, through that creation story. So this was a great little note from this individual. Really appreciate the correspondence, and cool. Hope we'll continue to receive correspondence from them.
Indeed. Yeah.
All right. Quick note from Philip C. It's pretty recent here. Philip says, Dear John and Greta, I have very much enjoyed listening to your show and have been a listener for about a year now. Both of you do a great job translating what J.R.R. Tolkien wrote into something most people can understand, and I think the two of you have a great dynamic. I recently listened to your latest episode, which was at the time 263, and was very excited to hear that you will once again be doing a read-through of the Silmarillion. When I first started listening to your show, I started at the very beginning and listened through to your episode about the War of Wrath. I really enjoyed it and definitely helped me to understand the book. Thanks a lot for that. Well, we're excited about it too. So he goes on to say, I'm very excited and a little nervous about Amazon's upcoming Lord of the Rings series, and I'm patiently marking down the days until September 2nd of next year. That's a good description of how most of us feel, right? Pretty excited, a little nervous. I especially am excited to see where Amazon is going with their photograph of Valinor and the two trees. That was a pretty, you know, made us all think a lot.
Yeah.
The War of the Rohirrim film, recently announced by New Line Cinema, also looks to be very interesting. I've wanted Tolkien's work to come to animation, and Helm Hammerhand seems like a good place to start.
Agreed.
Yeah. So he says, thanks a lot for this show. I'm eagerly awaiting new episodes and will continue to, we'll listen to them when they come out. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and God bless. So,
awesome.
Nice. Well, it's great to have you along, Philip. Thanks for the note, and keep in touch as you continue on your journey.
Yeah.
And then this is an interesting one. So we got a note from Dave of the Card Talk podcast, which we've been guests on before, and we're actually working on another appearance on that podcast. And at some point, we're gonna have Dave on here, and he's gonna teach us how to play the card game live.
Yeah.
But we got a note from him on the maybe it was 2 episodes ago. And or this was on, this was the one we did on the Fool's Hope, right? So this was a few episodes ago. And Dave says, hi, Greta and John. First, I'm excited to record our episode about Eucatastrophe, and looking forward to that. But on to the real content I wanted to share. I take the meaning of a Fool's Hope differently than you do. I actually listened to the show twice just to make sure, and it seems that you think Gandalf is saying that he has hope for fools like Pippin. And so he goes on to say, I've always understood this as his way of relating to and being part of the fellowship, and he is calling himself a fool. There are a few times when he calls members of the fellowship fools. He definitely calls Pippin a fool. Even more famously, he calls the whole fellowship fools as they linger at the bridge of Khazad-dûm, watching him fall. Fly, you fools. When he says he has a fool's hope, I always took this as his way of becoming one of the fools that thought that the plan is to destroy the ring. To destroy the ring was going to work. I believe he was saying that he, a fool himself, has hope the plan will work. This does much to ease the harshness with which he scourged Pippin, both at the well in Moria and in Edoras, when he looked at the Palantir. Not only is Pippin a fool, but Gandalf, the mighty Gandalf, is also a fool because he had this plan. And he has hope that the plan to destroy the ring will work. The fool in this case is himself, and he has hope. But even more importantly, he is one of them, one of the fools. He's part of the team. not above it, not off to the side, but rather playing with all the fools, and is, in fact, one of them himself, and he still has hope. So I was a little surprised by this, because I was actually trying to communicate what I feel like Dave communicated right there. So, I mean, I don't know if you remember back, Greta, but like, so I was trying to kind of say, I was the most interesting thing to me was the allusion to like this idea of the fool's hope, which I feel like is very prominent in St. Paul's writings, right? That, you know, he talks about like what we believe is, you know, as Christians is foolishness, right? It's seen as foolishness by the world, right? And when I read Gandalf say that there never was much hope, only a fool's hope, I feel like I hear Tolkien making an allusion to that from St. Paul, this idea of a fool's hope. I certainly, we can make the intra textual references to Gandalf calling Pippin a fool at different times, right? Fool of Took, right? When he's mad at him about something he's done. But I wasn't saying necessarily that he has hope for fools like Pippin. It was more saying like we have this hope, like our hope feels foolish, right? That Frodo will actually succeed in this, right? There never was much hope, only a fool's hope, right? For, you know, for all of us. And only a fool would hope that he'd succeed, right? And Gandalf is including himself in that number, right? Because Gandalf sent him on this mission. He's not going to send him on a mission that he has absolutely no chance of succeeding in, right? And so Gandalf is including himself in that number. So anyway, I wanted to read Dave's note just in case there was any other people that got the wrong message from that. I definitely feel like Gandalf is including himself in that number and not just like singling out Pippin right there, but it's this very tender moment because he's like, now we're fools together, right? Like we're fools in all of this together, right? And he's saying like, it's almost like, I know I've called you a fool in the past, but like we are hoping in Frodo's success as together as fools in this case, right? So wholeheartedly agree that this is a moment of like solidarity between Gandalf and other fools such as Pippin here. So yeah,
I agree, because it's I mean that's like, I mean that was really what bonded the fellowship, right? Was that they all that was their shared mission, right? And anybody looking at it from the outside would be like, dude, that's foolishness, right? But they kept hoping, and you know, like that was a thing that united them.
They kept on rolling.
I had something else to say
with
too,
the fool's
but I can't
hope.
remember what it was.
Oh, well, you're gonna think of it as soon as we're done.
I know, I will. No, but that's that was a really nice note from Dave though.
Absolutely. Well, we are looking forward to collaborating with Dave again here soon. And y'all should go check out Card Talk, a Lord of the Rings living card game podcast. So it's a fun game, and it's complicated for those who are new to it. So this is if you are interested in playing, this is exactly the podcast you want to go listen to, so you can learn about all the fun that it is. So Dave, always great to hear from you. Absolutely. And look forward to collaborating here soon. All right, y'all. That is all we got for this episode.
All right.
We'd love to hear from you. TolkienRoadPodcast@gmail.com, TolkienRoad.com, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, wherever you can find us and reach out to us. We will reply as soon as we are able. All right. Thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: Andrew T,
John R,
Ms. Anonymous,
Redhawk,
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
Shannon S,
Brian O,
Emilio P,
Zeke F,
James A,
James L,
Chris L,
Chuck F,
Asya V,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C,
David of Pints with Jack,
Jonathan D,
Eric S,
Eric B,
Johanna T,
Mike M,
Robert H,
Paul D,
Julia,
and Werty,
as well as those celebrating their patron anniversary in November: Matthew F,
and James.
Thank you all so much. Thanks to everybody
guys.
for listening. We will talk at you next time.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.